Well, team, welcome back to another episode of What's Next. Man, I am giddy with excitement about our next guest. I've had the great pleasure of spending some time with him, hearing about his philosophies around the great sport of golf, and probably most importantly, just about how life can mirror some of that. And he's a deep thinker on both topics. I think you're really going to love this journey we're going to go on today. There's probably 2 hours that are going to be packed into about 35 minutes. So it's going to feel fast and frenetic. But without any further ado, I want to introduce Chris Como. I'll give you a brief little background of his, and I'm going to read it just so I don't mess it up. He's coached top players, and we wouldn't be doing it justice if we didn't start with Tiger. We had Jason Day, Xander, awesome win as of late. Bryson, Kurt Kitayama, Trevor Immelman, Jamie Lovemark, Pearson Cody, Siwoo Kim. The list goes on. I mean, his work in the industry is really unrivaled. And I think he'd be the first one to tell you he's learned from some greats. And we're going to talk about that as we get going. He's been ranked as one of the top 50 teachers in America list in Golf Magazine. Also, our Golf Digest, top 100 in Golf Magazine. Best 50 teachers in 22, 23, and my guest soon to be 24. Very unique approach in that his teaching is not one size fits all. We're also going to talk a little bit about that and some of the challenges that come with that. He's got the Como coaching philosophy, Como Academy, been featured on Golf Channel, Peacock, Golf Pass, Como Concepts. Chris, I'm sure I'm leaving stuff out, but again, thank you for joining the show, Chris, and maybe help me fill in the gap. What have I missed there, or what have been some of your highlights, some of the stuff that you're either working on or have worked on in the past?
Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Yeah, the show on the golf, I've done a couple different shows on the Golf Channel. One was called Como Concepts, one was called Swing Expedition. Went to grad school for biomechanics, did some cool research with a guy named Dr. Kwan before I started teaching tour guys, which was really fun. So that's pretty much it.
Nice, humble approach. Hopefully we'll dig in a little bit here. Okay, so take me through this. What's your journey into coaching? Was it, hey, I'm a high-level player, and you and I have shared some of this, but for people that don't maybe know the background other than they see you on the Golf Fix, and here's this guy working with the best of the best on tour, flying around as I'm having a tough time catching up with you at which tour event you're at. What's that journey? Like high-level player, just interested in golf? Like how did you get into the coaching side to begin with?
Pretty good player. In hindsight, I tried to play a little bit after college. In hindsight, especially after working with some of these guys who are the best, wasn't anywhere close to that level. A lot of people will ask the question of, well, how do you coach some of the best players in the world? Whatever, Tiger Woods, Bryson, Xander, if you're not like as good as they are, type of thing. And it's, well, there's not many people who are as good as they are, but that's where I kind of went down this path of working for different academies to pick the brains of the guys who were considered to be the best in the industry. And then went to grad school to learn more about the human body, physics, and kind of blend a world of some traditional instruction with some science. And at the end of the day, if someone's a great player on the PGA Tour, one of the best in the world, they're still kind of oftentimes caught in the labyrinth of their own subjectivity. And then with my background and kind of seeing all sorts of versions of ways people swing it, different methodologies to coach, and a little bit of that background in biomechanics, the idea would be that I can be a good resource for that person, whether it be helping them find their sweet spot where they perform the best. Sometimes it's making a swing change based upon some performance goals. Sometimes it's making a swing change because they have an injury that they're trying to work around. Whatever it is, but that's where I think my sort of specialized knowledge can be of value to someone playing at that level. And the edges they're competing with are so small, and the money that they're competing for is quite large. So those small edges can be worth a lot to someone. So that's kind of where I add value potentially to someone at that level.
And I mean, we could probably spend this whole show right there, because what I'm hearing you describe is so similar. If I take the word golf out and I put high performing business in, I mean, the same words, right? It's on a razor's edge. Big dollars could be at stake. There's professional and human development here. So I know that's kind of a tee up to your philosophy in general, but in order to build that skill set, so you went and learned from some of the greats, which was awesome. I mean, did you look at that and say, that's the path? So yeah, I'm a great player, to your point. Like maybe now you look at it and go, man, maybe I wasn't that great. But certainly you're in the top percentile given that range. As you decide to move into coaching, did you immediately see some of these sort of blanks or blind spots that, man, I got to go fill that stuff now. Otherwise I can't go to a higher level? Was that sort of the driver?
Yeah, I would say even I've always been obsessed and just gravitated towards what makes a golf swing work in golf coaching from even before I got into coaching. For whatever reason, it just grabbed me. And I remember reading books from guys who are, say, like the number one golf coach in the country, in the world, and the number two golf coach in the world, and they would have very different opinions on what they were saying. And if I were to go to two physicists and be like, what happens if I drop my phone? They're both, or let go of my phone, they're going to both say it falls to the ground because gravity, at least in an Newtonian perspective, they understand it, right? So they're going to come up with the same answer. So to me, it was one of those things where, oh, there's clearly a gap in the body of knowledge. There's like things that aren't understood for the best to have these like very polarized opinions on things. And actually, when I graduated college, I was like really close to going to law school, but I was so just grabbed and enamored by this whole thing. And I felt like I saw an opportunity in the industry. And it's one of those things where, if you can be the best at it and make an impact, there's probably be money had in whatever the profession is, whether you're a golf coach or a yoga teacher or whatever it is, right? So that was kind of my goal. And I felt like on the front end, the best thing I could do would be to study from the people who are considered the best and learn as intimately as possible kind of what was in their brain. So I did that and then ended up in Dallas, had a little bit of a detour where I actually played poker for a few years at night to help fund my golf business, which is its own incredible game and very similar to like poker thinking, that whole like dealing with incomplete information, learning how to solve problems from a very probabilistic perspective is very similar to what I would say golf coaching is. So that was a great kind of overlapping experience as well. And I funded my golf business for a little bit doing that. Golf business started to take off. And then through a bit of serendipity, I had this opportunity to go to grad school to study under a renowned biomechanist and start collecting data on golfers in this like really high-tech biomechanics lab, learn more about like actual physics principles, learn more about like true constraints of the human body. And then I just kind of, with all of that, and as well as adjacent interests in like psychology and yada, 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 kind of created this hodgepodge approach that I would like to think is holistic and appreciates the whole ecosystem that is a golfer and a golfer trying to compete at a high level.
Well, I think the results speak for themselves. And you and I have talked about this before. We're big scoreboard people, right? I mean, don't confuse effort with results. And I think in this case, that holistic approach, Swiss Army knife, whatever you want to call it, where there are different ways to figure that out, I can appreciate that, because at the end of the day, if it wasn't working, I still feel like you'd be figuring that out. And I know you still are. We're going to talk about that too.
That's an interesting, even its own kind of conversation, is this idea of results versus what is a process and sticking to it somewhat independent of result. And this is kind of back to the poker thinking a little bit, right? There's so much variance in a game like poker or even golf. I mean, it's why a guy can win a tournament one week and then miss the cut the next week. And how do you deal with these things that have a lot of just like volatility, a lot of variance in them? And in some ways, not get too caught up into the short-term results and stay true to a process, but then don't get so married to the mantra of process that you become blind to being your own harshest critic of your process and in the effort to refine it over time. So it's almost like this, I found at least, it's like this wave of, when you're in a phase of here's the process, you have to somewhat not be too swayed by the results, because that results can be due to some volatility, right? But at intervals, you have to look back and say, okay, if over a big enough sample, we're not getting the results we want, we need to start to review the process and see if that needs some sort of tweaking here or this or there, or blowing up possibly. So I find that actual balance between committed to the process, which is almost in a way not getting too caught up in the results, versus, hey, at the end of the day, the scoreboard's going to give you like a really honest feedback of things, at least in the long run, and how to balance those two worlds. I actually think it's an interesting topic.
I'm just going to stay here because we have a theory here at Opportunity Seed, which is math never lies, right? So math never lies. It always tells a story and it has no emotion. And so to your point, in these seasons of life, whether it's golf, business, whatever, we do look at that exact thing, that we're in a season of process right now. But even in that, and we may agree or differ in this opinion, I think even in a process season where winning isn't the result, but committing to that process and the metrics we put in place, and some of it just might be hours of practice. It might be a rebuild in your case of a grip, a takeaway, or whatever. But when we're committed to that and we go, that's for right now, that's the scoreboard for us, is that we're committing to that. Scoreboard is not about where you finished this week on the money list or whatever it is. I think it's important that someone says, okay, I know the season that I'm in so that the data won't lie to me, right? To your point, that it's not just a thing, but if you really kind of distill it down to, I call it the season in time, season in life. Again, whether business, relationship with my wife or my kids or golf. When we kind of know where we're at, then we don't aimlessly kind of wander with, well, I'm tweaking my swing, but I expect to finish in the top 5. And both know it's probably not going to happen. So yeah, I think that's an interesting point, that identifying that season is probably a really important task. And I'm saying that because for our audience, again, people that either have made the leap in entrepreneurialism, looking for some sort of pearls of wisdom to say, what should I be thinking about? I think what you just identified resonates with a lot of people who have played a game at a very high level or coached at a high level. They go, look, we know how to break these things down. We know how to do pregame review. We know how to do post-game or post-round review, right? Build the next game plan. I mean, that's kind of the theory behind what's next. It's not about what you did. It's what we're doing next. And how do you distill that? So now I appreciate you bringing that up. So in that, you've got this holistic approach, which means if you're working with me or Xander, because we're so similar and we score very similar, but if you're working with either of us, your approach would be different. Have you found that to be...
We both live in San Diego.
Very true. Well, at least for part of the year, right? So yeah, and both San Diego State grads. I mean, you can start to see the similarities here outside of just general talent. But in working with us, we're uniquely different. So you've got to build different plans. You got to assess us differently. You definitely have to talk to us differently. And then you amplify that by the number of guys you're working with on tour, let alone the business that you're trying to operate and optimize, and then have a life outside of that. Is it hard to scale that type of personalized approach? Or you kind of said it's what grabbed me. Is that what makes you you? Like, or is it both?
What was the last thing you said?
Or is it both? I mean, you've got this personalized approach. So is it hard to scale that when you look at, okay, here's the list of my clients. I can't do any more than that because I'm not just having them come to me and do this one thing. Like we're going to break it down individually. Is it hard to scale that?
I mean, I haven't figured out how to yet. So I'd like to think some versions of it may be scalable, or there's some sort of extensions of it that could be scalable or derivatives of it. But yeah, that personalized approach they take with a tour guy or like a private client, I don't take on a lot of clients. It is hard to scale. It is hard because it is so much just like information about an individual. It's not like a method. I don't have a pamphlet I can give someone. I opened up an academy in Dallas, and I guess by training these coaches, there's maybe a little bit of scalability in that, I suppose. But even that, I mean, it's very small. Like I have a couple coaches that are working for me or with me, and one of them has been with me for 10 years, and it's been a lot of just like discussions, almost like a platonic, like the platonic dialogue kind of approach. It's been more of that type of training than here's the manual and here. So I have found to be a challenge of scaling what I do. I mean, it is interesting that I'm in a place where I do have a bit of that entrepreneurial bug, and it just seems intellectually stimulating, kind of fun, whatever it is. And you've been a great sort of person to bounce ideas off of and been a mentor. So it's like, how do I take what I do and possibly turn it into something that is potentially interesting? It would have to meet a couple different sort of like standards, right? Like obviously I would want it to be economically viable, but I wouldn't even say that's the primary driver or at least the sole driver. It would also, because I do love the version of what I'm doing, but it would have to be something where it felt like it had like true impact at a somewhat bigger reach. And then just like really kind of connecting to a part of me that's somewhat more creative, just a different aspect of me that maybe hasn't been fully kind of connected to with, some of the other work that I've done. So I'm in a very interesting kind of like self-reflecting place, life, business-wise with some of this stuff. So I don't know how much this would probably be a better podcast for some of your audience, maybe 5 years from now, but because I'm in that transition. But I guess even the thought process of it's maybe interesting to people.
No, Chris, there's a very good reason why you were on my short list for getting ready to launch. And so this place that you're at, I think you'd be pleasantly surprised that for a lot of high performers, again, I keep saying pro athletes and X, but they fit in that realm of, yeah, I got this itch. I think I've got something special, just not sure. And I think that discovery process is really not only very pure, it'll be fruitful, because as much as you said, yeah, I've got to make a living at this, you're very quick to say, it's actually not the driver. And I know you well enough to say, when you're having fun, we know the money follows because you just do your best work. And to me, as I'm writing notes here on the side, you said it grabbed me. That was early on. This idea of discovery in golf grabbed you. And so, not that we're doing our coaching stuff here, but I would say that's a place for us to explore, is how do you then light that same lamp for somebody else, whether it's a student or a teacher, and say, okay, how do I do that so it's grabbing and I can do that 3, 4, 5, 10 times over? And okay, that's got some scale now, right? And there's still a lot to discover there, but I think your question is spot on, and it's so timely for people who are like, I'm sitting right here and I'm wondering this exact same question. So me personally, I think that pretty spot on. So you've had a chance to work with these, not just great tour players. I mean, you're, without naming names in your client list, some super high performers. I mean, high performers, both in wealth and I think just in sort of impact in both places. Do you find that there's any common threads between, let's say, your high performing coaching world, high performing player world, and high performing business world that you'd say, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like that, those character traits, they just kind of float between each of those pillars, if you will?
Now, it's always so hard to know because it's like you see things through your lens, right? And I feel like I have some of these traits. So I might be like projecting this out a little bit, but I feel like a lot of these high performers that I'm around, like they clearly work really hard and they're very talented in whatever their domain is. That's like a given. But I feel like I keep seeing this like incredible level of like almost curiosity and just like wanting to like learn and like just discovery. That seems to be a kind of a common denominator. Like even just to stay with the golf, even a guy like Tiger or Bryson or like all the guy, Jason, Xander. I mean, these guys are so great at golf, but they're constantly trying to like, what about this shots? And they're just got this like very deep curiosity about even their own discipline that really, in theory, they're in the 0.0000001% of it all, which is like remarkable to me. And then like you're saying, some of the high performers that have been around outside of golf, I would say it's very similar. They're just like always looking for those opportunities to learn how to discover whatever at a deeper level. There's just like this very consistent drive of just curiosity about the world and their own particular disciplines usually. And again, it's hard to know, that's kind of like somehow biased by my own lens, but that is something I feel like I've seen over and over again. And I'm going to, just because we've talked about this before a little bit, but there's oftentimes, and not always, because this is still a big part of it with a lot of people, but there's oftentimes just a little bit of this like separation between like air quotes success and failure. And it's more of just this discovery of things that they seem that they're sometimes operating from. I don't know if I totally agree with that, because there is some extremely highly competitiveness where there's still like a lot of success and failure kind of stuff going on. But anyway, yeah.
I wrote down hardworking, curiosity, and have the discipline, right? And that discipline to me is always a continuous loop. Does it put you back into curiosity mode? Does it remind you, hey, this is probably time I need to work a little harder, especially if we're getting back in the process? When I'm in the flow, I probably feel like I'm working less. But when I'm in the grind, I feel like I'm working more, but the discipline to do it when I don't feel like it, I think that's universal, right? So I think your lens, although you may say, it's just my lens, I ask because the more and more we accumulate this data, if I'm just starting out on this journey, myself at 25 or 35, these are things I want to know. Do I have that skill set? If I don't, man, you mentioned it very early. I had a gap in knowledge. You said it. I have a gap in knowledge. What does that tell me? You're a guy who's curious and says, I'm not good enough here. I'm a really good golfer. Already kind of worked with some of the greats in the game. I've got a skill set and a bag of tools, but you still said there's a gap. And you went because you were curious and did more. So I think those are applicable. And I appreciate you kind of speaking to that, because again, these are the nuggets that our hope is the show kind of brings that to light. What are these things that you've gleaned from being able to be around guys like that? Because you're doing something that maybe a handful of people on the face of this planet get to do, which is not only so cool, but that you're paying attention, I think is really important, because you've probably seen a lot of good coaches that they're not really paying attention. They're doing their thing, but they're not paying attention. And I know about you pay attention a lot. So as we transition, let's say a little more back from experience, but into, okay, personal, business, kind of where you're going. Do you feel like in this next stage where you're kind of trying to discover your thing, was there like a split rock moment where you said, oh my, okay, man, I'm either tired of doing this, so I need to go do that, or man, I think I'm onto something that maybe I could do more, or on my own, or this entrepreneurial itch? Was there a split rock moment that you go, that was it?
It definitely wasn't coming from a place of I'm tired of what I'm doing, because I love what I'm doing still. And if anything, I'm the one thing from or maybe like a fatigue perspective would be traveling all the time. It's something that strategically I'm trying to figure out how to structure my business where I travel a little bit less. So I love what I'm doing, and I'm trying to figure out how do I do what I'm doing like indefinitely for the rest of my life in a way that feels truly sustainable. So that's part of one of the things that I'm trying to organize just in this sort of like phase, if you will. And then the entrepreneurial side of it's more of just that intuitive itch, that sort of that spiritual itch of whatever it is, that if right now it's a process of just like exploration for me. It's like there is this itch of what is it that I can do that has the most sort of creative expression and the biggest impact for other people and for myself. So it's just kind of asking the questions, taking a step back. Cause like, for me, it has been whatever, it's been like 25 years of like kind of put your head down and grind, whether it be from traveling around, working at different places, going to grad school, building a business, working with tour guides, going to a ton of events a year. It's just been this blur in an incredible way. So I don't say blur to kind of like somehow diminish it, but it was an incredible blur. But like you've mentioned, it was a particular season. And now it's, how do you have that sort of season of life, look back in a lot of ways, kind of reevaluate? It's like, how do I do what I do going forward even better in a way that feels sustainable, in a way that gives the opportunity for the biggest sort of impact and reach? And these are just the questions that I'm asking myself constantly right now.
And so when you do that, I won't give away what I've asked you to do, because I don't know if that was a regular practice. How do you go through that? You and I have talked about journaling, right? And so I'm using my Apple Pencil. That's my thing. I think you've kind of agreed it maybe with my arm twist to give it a try. But up to that point, you'd started this journey of discovery way before that. What was your method? Is it a quiet place? Is it time on an airplane? Like, where's your place, and what's your way to kind of do that where you feel like, okay, I at least have a way to capture my thinking or have time to think?
Yeah, I think, it's like for so long, I was so fortunate, because I know it's a struggle for a lot of people, but it was like, I was pretty clear on what I wanted to do. I was like, this is what I'm going to do. I saw what I felt like was a gap in the overall knowledge of the industry. Obviously a gap personally too, because I was part of the industry, but a gap in the overall knowledge of the industry. I just kind of had this sense of, okay, this is where I want to take it. And it was pretty clear. And it was just like, okay, put your head down and do the work. And obviously there's all sorts of like twists and turns and audibles along the way. But for the most part, that rough arc, I had a pretty good sense of. Now that I'm in this place where I have a lot more like resources, and that resources can be everything from relationships to reputation to whatever it is. And I'm in this place of what's next. it has become a lot more laying that all out, like on a sort of a blank canvas, if you will, a metaphorical blank canvas. These are these sort of the resources, these sort of the things that you've done, and then maybe the places that you have expertise or whatever it is, and then really meditating on what is next. A lot of journaling. I've been doing a lot of journaling on like blank paper where it almost becomes like its own version of like art and charts and stuff like that. It's been fun, even just in and of itself as like its own thing. Even if I were to not do anything else, like even if it were to not look different, it's been a really fun process, its own sort of learning how to get something that's inside of me or anybody, I would imagine, that's maybe a little bit fuzzy, that's not fully formed yet, and try to get that out into the world, at least in some version, and then construct that and do iterations of that. And then it becomes, is it something, which I'm not there yet, is this something that makes sense to try to execute?
Well, I wish I could just replay that for everybody, like the smile on your face, the inflection in your voice, that pickup of energy. If you don't journal already, and Chris kind of said it, right? Just meditation, which is really just thinking about your thinking. He didn't say, here's the way I journal. It's just, I was journaling charts, graphs, whatever, arrows. It could just look like graffiti, but getting it out on paper, I think it raises that emotion. And to your point, whether you ever do it or not, it's just good for the soul, right? It's just a great exercise. And I know over our journey, it has certainly added some clarity. And I think as much in where do you want to go? And that's still a full exploration. But I've been really proud of you for where you know you don't want to go. And I think that's really cool because the overarching statement here is there's no shortcuts, there's no cheat code. Looks like hard work. There's going to be some days and seasons in life that it's a grind. But what have you learned there, which is really cool? And saying, okay, I went through that and that was awesome. To your point, I wasn't trying to talk down to coaching. It's been fantastic. It's been a blur. It was so much fun. Like time passes, time flies when we're having fun. It has been a blur, but how do you do this for the next 40, 50 years of your life where you're having just as much fun, but not feeling exhausted at the end of the journey, right? And so I think you sharing that, even just meditation and journaling, has been a really good place for you to keep on this journey of, does it make sense for me to make the leap into full-blown entrepreneurialism, right? Which you're kind of already there, but what does it look more of, right? I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I do feel like, and again, I can only speak for myself, but I feel like if you have this sort of this itch, whatever you want to call it, and it's in you, it's somewhat like there, maybe not fully fleshed out, but let's say you pull it out, you refine ideas. Let's say it even gets to a level where some of the numbers are crunched and it becomes like a proper business model. And let's say you decide not to do it for whatever reason. I feel like I've come to at least for me, that process of getting there is cathartic. That has its own release of that energy, which I think even if you were to end up in a place of, I'm going to do exactly what I'm doing now. I'm going to keep the hypothetical 9-to-5 job that I was like somewhat daydreaming about starting this business, but I've decided I'm going to keep the 9-to-5 job and not do this business, but have gone through that process. I think you can oftentimes come back to just what you're doing with a totally different relationship with it because of that. So I've found that going through these type of like exercises, this journaling, has whatever it is I am doing is actually deepened my relationship, even outside of just exploring something, another tangent sort of thing, or a side business or whatever it is. It's deepened my relationship with whatever my current sort of trajectory has been, which has been interesting.
Okay. So I got to go there then. In writing that down, is it like in writing it, I may be realizing the grass isn't greener? Is it a little bit of that?
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah, it's cool. I had never thought about it that way, but that's anytime I'm looking up and to the right, I'm thinking, right? But that is so true because I'm getting coaching as well, right? And so in my coaching, there's a lot of writing about the what ifs, and you build these 1- and 2-page business plans, which is super cool. It's fun. And I didn't think about it the way you just said it, which is sometimes when I say, oh, that's a crazy idea, what I come back to, I'm totally fired up about, because it wasn't actually that it was a crazy idea. What I realized is the grass isn't greener going to do that. And so when I come back, like, I should really appreciate what I have right here And if I just gave it that energy, right? To me, now that you're saying it's the old adage of when you ask somebody like, well, you got divorced and the guy lost 30 pounds and stopped drinking and got his hair cut and all this stuff. And you go, what if you did that in your old relationship? I'd probably still be married. It's the grass isn't always, I totally appreciate you bringing that up. That's
yeah,
an awesome byproduct.
I just think we all probably have this sort of like creative energy in us that doesn't have to, but we want to get it out some capacity. And then whether that becomes like a fully formed thing or not, just getting that out of us into something that's not just a fuzzy version of it in our mind. It's like its own therapy, if you will, in a weird way, right? That I think can change the relationship with what you're currently doing. And you can even play the hypothetical if you were to imagine like, okay, I'm going to air quotes start this business and imagine yourself in that. And then it's, okay, the reality of that, you may be daydreaming about, oh man, I wish I didn't have all these different responsibilities. It's just fun to explore these different things. And I think putting time into that, again, it's just the benefits of journaling and just taking time to, I think, explore your own inner world, I think is so valuable because it helps, in my opinion, it helps with everything else you're going to do as well.
Coming from a guy who coaches, again, some of the best on the planet at what they do. And I think having that idea that being creative, getting it out, going through the process, right? Speaking of process, super important. As one of the byproducts, and I don't know there's a definite answer to this, but is going through that, have you found that you've either identified that you didn't know or put an exclamation point behind what you did know, which is, what's my superpower, unique ability, whatever I call it superpower, but have you, like, what is your superpower? And has this process like really cemented that for you, or has it helped grow it?
Yeah, I think it's probably helped grow it and both maybe. I think my superpower is I feel like I'm pretty good at asking. I think I ask good questions. I think I'm pretty good at trying to get to the core of something and not getting too caught up in this superficial, like what is a method or what is a correlation, but not the causation of something, just what feels like is like a superficial kind of strategy or whatever, but try to reduce it to what is the core of something. So I feel like I'm good at asking questions to get there. And I've probably, in at least recent time, have really turned that towards myself, which has been good and helpful. So I've probably had that power directed towards dissecting a method or a way to look at a golf swing or an overall approach to help a player get better and be like, well, what about this? And what about that? And it's always helped me formulate a game plan from a sort of, again, probabilistic perspective, knowing that we're dealing with incomplete information, but like, what can we come up with as our best sort of like strategy with the information that we do have, as well as accounting for what, we know to be a universe of unknowns that you're dealing with, of unknown variables, but then really kind of shine that sort of like questioning inward has been cool. I don't know if it's good or bad, or it's been good. It's been cool. It's been good in the sense of just, I don't know, to probably help with my own personal growth.
Now, I mean, you've almost answered my question, which was, how hard is that? I mean, looking in the mirror, the old adage, right? It's tough, but what you just described, because you are so good at that, and your vocation would say that, right? When you're working with these guys and it's an individualized approach, you have got to have this dissecting lens of being able to ask those questions, but each with your eyes, with your mouth. You got to be listening for things, including contact on the club face, let alone what's the player saying right after. But to focus that inward, what has it been like? I mean, he said it could be good and bad. What's the immediate emotion that comes from shining the light inward?
Yeah, just very impactful. I mean, it's been good. Sometimes it's tough too, right? To like really try to be honest. And we all have our blind spots, but you don't know what you don't know by definition, right? But I think having, a bit of humility of knowing that you don't know what you don't know is I think in general, a good way to go about it. I mean, I've really tried to surround myself with people who can help with those blind spots, whether it be, I talk to a counselor, a therapist regularly. I've surrounded myself with what I feel like are good friends and mentors. And for me, it's just been about being intentional with allocating time and energy and space to do that. And then having a little bit of faith that the right sort of like resources to help with that process will emerge, right? A little bit of that what is the whole phrase? When the student is seeking, the teacher appears, or whatever it is, right? It's like one of those. There's a certain little bit of faith of, okay, look, I'm going to set the intention in this direction and really trust that things will show up that will help with that process. It's getting like really kind of like philosophical, but I really believe one of the best journeys, the most incredible journeys we take in our life is that journey inward also. And for me, it's a bit about how do you hold, because it could seem in a superficial way to be distracting from the outward stuff, right? From this is my goal, this is what I'm trying to achieve, or whatever. And it possibly can be, but it's philosophically, it's like you can accomplish all this stuff, whatever, but if you don't have that other, sometimes what do you have exactly? So for me, it's been about really learning to hold the tension between those two worlds. It's like, how do you take time to kind of having one foot in each world in the sand? How do you take time to have that inner like space and reflection and whatever, the light shine inward, look in the mirror, and then still having a foot in the outer world to kind of move forward with goals. But then I think as you do that reflection and that work inward, the energy you move towards those outward goals changes. And even what you value in terms of the outward goals changes. So I think these things have this relationship between each other that really at the end of the day changes how you show up in the world.
I'm just tempted to do a mic drop right there. I mean, if you get nothing else out of this episode, that right there, and Chris, thank you for being raw, right? I mean, I think that's the end thing. You could certainly put on the Superman cape here and say, I don't do this, I'm good, I work with these guys, I'm great. But I think to say, I surround myself with a team of people who are helping me ask these questions. I've had the privilege of working with you, I'll say mentorship relationship role, and just helping to craft some of that. Jim Rohn says, show me the 5 people that you surround yourself with and I'll show you your future. I think you speak to that, right? Which is, no, I don't have all the answers. I'm going to look inward first, but I'm also going to ask some counsel of other people. And really that's at the very genesis of the show. It's getting guys like you. Thank you for being brutally honest about that approach, which is so cool. I just love that. You surround yourself with people who can help and you're willing to ask that tough question. As we wrap, and again,
can I just jump in there real quick?
Yeah, please, let's keep going for sure.
So I think it's interesting because to me, like, I love like Star Wars and I love like Lord of the Rings. It was like, right? Like Joseph Campbell's like Hero of a Thousand Faces, like that whole hero's journey arc, right? Yeah. And I love this idea of you have a hero and then you have the guide, like a Gandalf or a Yoda or whatever, right? I really feel like for me at least, one of the great sort of like fulfillments in life is playing both of those roles, right? And then kind of having that cycle of being a coach to someone, in theory, being a Yoda or a Gandalf to someone, but then also finding a coach and being the Luke Skywalker or the Harry Potter or whatever, right? And going into that relationship and being both those roles at the same time, for me, has been a place where I've found a lot of personal flow because I do enjoy playing both those roles. Here's a goal where I feel like is my own kind of, as the metaphorical hero, this is the goal that I'm trying to achieve. And then having coaches or guides to help support that. At the same time, here is a goal that someone else is trying to achieve, and I'm a guide or a coach for that. And having both those at the same time I have found very fulfilling to me personally.
So you're coming back on the show. We could literally just start the next episode right there because I think there's so much depth to that. You're right? As a business owner, and I think it dispels the myth that you have to be a certain age to go mentor somebody, or you have to be a certain age to start getting coaching, right? Because I think the arrows can point in opposite directions. And what you've so succinctly said is, it kind of doesn't matter. When you get to do both, you're benefiting on each end, and it just makes you a better human, right? And again, I've had the great pleasure of spending time with you, and you can say you fit into that upper crust category of just being there, always thinking and very mindful about that. So I typically end the show with takeaways. I think you just nailed it, which is be mindful, look inward, find opportunities to be both Luke and Yoda at thoughts in your life, to use those guys. I dig it, which is awesome. Chris, thank you. I can't thank you enough for spending some time with us and just kind of peeling back the onion here. It's been great. I will say, if you've loved the show, please give us a rating, drop some comments in there, subscribe. We always appreciate it. It's how we bring more and do more. Please put in there, you'd love to see Chris again, because only validate the fact that we're going to do this as often as we possibly can, and to get his brain on all things, a little bit golf, which I think is pretty awesome, but the mindfulness and kind of this journey, which we'll track along the way. So Chris, thank you. It's been great. Any parting shots? If people want to learn more about Chris Como, the coaching stuff, where do they find you? Where can they kind of hit you up?
I'm having fun with Instagram right now. I just brought on a guy that's been helping me do like just some more fun stuff on Instagram. So Chris Como Golf on Instagram has been kind of a fun platform recently.
Awesome. We'll have all of your social links in the show notes for sure in the bio below. And so you can find Chris any number of places. Check him out on Instagram. It's actually been a pretty cool journey, all the clips and reels that we've been able to see of late. So good job on that. And folks, we love having you here. So hopefully you've enjoyed what's next. And the premise of the show is it's not about what you did before, but discovering what's next. And so hope you enjoyed, and we'll catch you on the flip side.
Thanks, Bryan.